Welcome to the very first edition with Eusebius McKaiser. This is our very first edition, and we will be speaking to Wilmot James today. If you've never heard of Wilmot, then I'm afraid the man is in trouble because he's trying to replace Helen Zille as the next leader of the Democratic Alliance. We're going to be getting to know him over the next 20 minutes or so. So this is your chance. Perhaps you're a voting delegate in Port Elizabeth next week even, to decide whether or not this is the man that should be upsetting Mmusi Maimane, who is the other main contender. Wilmot, thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us today.
Well, it's very good to speak with you, Eusebius.
Wilmot, you don't really have a chance, do you? You're a really nice guy, but do you really believe you have a chance to become the next leader in terms of the numbers?
Well, look, I've been consulting across the country. I've been running a canvass nationally. I believe that I have a good offer, I have good support, and I'm competitive.
But deep in your heart, as a camera no nie was nie, would you still be saying off camera that the numbers are in your favor? You might deserve it in terms of some substance, but Mmusi tells me very confidently that he's got a clear majority.
Well, look, it's a tough battle. You know, the numbers are not in my favor, and it is a stretch. I believe that it's worth doing this. It's worth being competitive because it's not more than the numbers. It's also to put into place some precedents in terms of democratic practice. And so there's a double thing going on here. The first is a serious belief for me to fight this fight to the best of my ability. And there are some numbers that are in my favor. But yes, it's a stretch. And secondly, to in fact introduce some democratic precedents in the way in which we conduct these things in the country.
Let's ask a boring question that is probably the most important one. How would you summarize the basis on which a voting delegate in Port Elizabeth this forthcoming weekend should choose you over the other candidates?
Well, I think they should choose me because I offer a real alternative to the ANC, whereas my competitor offers another version of the ANC. And that effectively summarizes what differentiates me from him.
Okay, I want to explore exactly that. Let's start firstly with you dissing Mmusi Maimane, because if you say that the other candidates, all three of them, or however many others want to throw their names in, but let's focus on Mmusi, who is your real competitor here. If you say that he's giving us more of the ANC, if we were the DA, what would you mean by that?
Let me say that my offer is to have the DA be an alternative to the ANC. What that means is we don't flirt with the National Development Plan. We put forward our own plan, and we have such a plan called the Plan for Growth and Jobs. Firstly. Secondly, that we communicate with voters on the issues that matter to them, and not the issues that we think matter to them. And what are those issues? Those issues have to do with jobs, safety, education, health, and shelter. Those are the issues we want to communicate with them consistently, vigorously, and with authenticity. And this is the big thing, with authenticity over the long haul, in order to address their needs and communicate to them and with them about the issues that are close to their hearts.
To be fair, the only thing I hear you say by way of what might make another candidate more of the ANC is the National Development Plan. But the National Development Plan was also punted by outgoing leader Helen Zille. Are you suggesting that Helen Zille was mimicking the ANC?
What we were doing is in fact playing around with ANC policy. And we have been flirting with the NDP. And what we've been saying to the voters is that vote for us because we have a watered down version of the NDP before us. And that is absolutely politically the wrong thing to do. What we must do is differentiate ourselves from the ANC, both with regards to the NDP and some other practices as well. Some of them are clear. Cater deployment, I mean, that's not an issue. But it's principally about economic policy. And because jobs are the key issues that we need to address. And we think the ANC has failed in this question. And the NDP is their solution. We have our own solution. And I will lead the party in that direction, offering those solutions to the voters.
I want to talk economics in a second, but I also want to give some of the viewers of this first edition a chance. I've got some questions for you via Twitter. I've got some questions via Facebook. And one question that came up a lot, and I have to confess I was pleasantly surprised because I like political ideology, is how many people have picked up on this discussion about liberalism. I thought it was a parochial discussion between a couple of columnists. Sandile wants to know from Facebook whether you think the Democratic Alliance is still a liberal party and what that means for you.
Okay, this is what I believe is really important in terms of political principles and philosophy. The first is that I stand for enhancing and fighting for freedom, expanding freedoms. The second is to honor and respect diversity and non-racialism. The third are all the things associated with the protection of rights against abuses of the state. The fourth has to do with growing this economy using market forces. And finally, to have a safety net for people who fall between the cracks and special populations. Now, all of those principles you find in our Constitution, and they're all liberal democratic principles. So if you ask me a direct question, what am I? I'm a liberal democrat. And I define it in the terms that I just used the term.
But now we've got a little bit of a problem, because imagine I go to PE, I genuinely am not yet persuaded whether I should vote you or Musi, and I ask myself, what distinguishes Wilmot from Musi? The answer you've just given us, that speaks to liberal democracy and core principles that flow from the Constitution, which part of your last answer would Musi disagree with?
Let me say that in Port Elizabeth, what I stand for can be summarized as follows: that I have the ability, I have the willingness, and I have the courage to lead this party, the DA, strategically in a direction that speaks to and communicates with voters on the issues that matter to them. And that has to do with jobs, education, safety, health, and shelter. That's what distinguishes me from Musi. What it all rests on is the DA's growth and jobs plan. And we must speak about the economics of that. But that is what it is. It's strategic focus. It's not strategic drift. It's keeping the party in line with what it is we want to offer to the voter as an alternative to the ANC. So the ANC is the benchmark. It's been the dominant party in the country. It has tried its policies. Those policies have not universally failed, but the core policies around economic growth have in fact not succeeded. And what we want to do is put before the voters a genuine offer, and not simply as a party of opposition, but as also as a party of practice government on a municipal and provincial level, an offer that we think is authentic and compelling.
I can't find anything wrong with what you're saying. I have to confess, as a potential voter, as a liberal egalitarian, that's how I self-identify in terms of ideology. And as an interviewer, I can't skewer you. But I'm not sure whether you've distinguished yourself from Musi, because Musi, for better or worse, have had more airtime than you in the media over the last week or so. And he has been going banging on about market. He's been banging on about economic growth as the solution for both jobs and inequality. He's been going on about freedom despite his Christian ethics. He even was willing, although he changed his mind in the sometimes, but in conversation with me, to say that sex work absolutely is important and should be legalized in the name of freedom. So everything you say is agreeable for a liberal, but I'm not sure where you and Musi go apart ideologically. It's basically choosing between the same two candidates in terms of vision.
Well, I mean, I can't speak for Musi, and you've had a conversation with him, and all I can do is put my outfit forward and say that this is what it is. I can try and contrast it with Musi. I don't think that will get us very far. The voters and the people who will view this program will make up their own minds as to what distinguishes the two of us. But just to say, in my belief, what makes me different in terms of my offer is that I have a clear vision of leading the DA as a party, as an alternative to the ANC, and not as a light version of the ANC. And by that I mean that our core economic policies are sui generis. They are policies that we developed ourselves and tested them on a municipal and provincial level. And we believe that those policies will in fact result in the creation of work and jobs for South Africans.
Okay, let's drill into that. South Africans, we do not love speaking political economy, and yet at the end of the day, you're right, we should be doing that. The former Shadow Minister of Finance of the DA, Tim Harris, punted the idea of 8% economic growth sustainably as achievable and as one goal to also deal with the other evils of job creation that we need to get right, and also to give inequality a nice a fist in the face in terms of it also being an evil. Can you tell me what you are alluding to in a bit more detail, Wilmot? Because you want to talk economics, you think it's important, you don't like the National Development Plan. Where should we be headed economically?
You know, what creates jobs is investment. And so what a country needs to do is attract investment, both domestic investment. Domestic companies are not investing on scale in the country, and foreign investment. That's what generates jobs. Why do people invest here? Because there's some level of stability. There's obviously a market. There's some level of stability. There's a stable provision of services. There is a reliable supply of electricity. And there is a pool of skilled South Africans and educated South Africans available who can be upskilled depending on the nature of that investment. So that is what investors are looking for. Now, we know about the service delivery problems we've had. We know how compromised Eskom is. We know how our schooling system has failed in the way that it has. So our task as the DA in leading economic growth is to create the conditions whereby you attract foreign investments. And that means good service delivery. That means good electricity supply, but we don't control Eskom. Although in the city of Cape Town, it goes via the city of Cape Town to consumers. But still, Eskom is a problem, and we can't fix that right now. And in our educational provision, certainly in the province of the Western Cape, educational quality is a lot better on average than in the rest of the country, but it still has a far way to go. So, if you want this economy to grow, you can remove barriers to trade, you can stabilize commodity production, you can try and plug in the ports of the country into the global trading network, especially with China now beginning to shed some manufacturing industries, and we can take advantage of that. We can remove barriers to trade, as I said. We can remove some of the bureaucratic barriers that DTI and other state departments have erected, and we can expand trade. We should expand trade on a vast scale in order to grow us out of trouble. In short, you ask me, how do you get investment? How do you get jobs going in the country? Create conditions for foreign investment and domestic investment, and you'll see what the consequences will be.
Okay, the three final questions I want to explore, and then we'll leave it there for today. I'm sure we'll have a future opportunity for other aspects of governance. This is ultimately an interview to do with who should be the next leader of the DA. How important do you think public speaking and oratory are as attributes that a voting delegate in Port Elizabeth should take into account? And if I can be more blunt, some people might say that as incredibly eloquent as you are in writing and speaking academically to policy as you just have, that Musi is the person who can go around the country, give rousing speeches, call the president a broken man. Can you emulate that kind of oratory, and is it an important skill in a leader?
Let me tell you, Musi is superb as a big platform speaker. And there's a charm and a wit and a charisma that exemplifies the assets that he has. So there's no disputing that. And clearly that's to his advantage in terms of communicating with people on a big platform. I have other assets, right? I can't pretend to be what I'm not. And my assets are that I have a good mainspring of ideas. Some of them are policy-led, but ideas. I think ideas are really important to the future of a political party. A political party has to be agile and nimble and respond to voter interests and voter concerns and so on. I have that. I have the ability and agility, in fact, to navigate through the complexities of this world, but also to speak very directly to voters. I have a constituency in Athlone. I have the ability to communicate with voters. I like direct contact. I like a whole range of interpersonal engagements. I thrive on it, and it gives me pleasure to do that kind of work. So I have assets. The voters clearly must see what those assets are, and it contrasts with the assets of Musi. I think I'm more solid as a person in terms of policy, and clearer in terms of understanding what needs to be done. I've had a lot of experience. I fought against apartheid. I spent time in jail. I know what indignity is. I know what the fight against apartheid was about. It was a struggle for dignity. I worked in putting the constitution together when I was head of IDASA. I've been involved in policy when it comes to migration and to the electoral reform system. So I'm very experienced in working through the world of politics, and experience matters when the future of this country's politics are coalition politics. So you must know who you're dealing with when you're dealing with Cyril Ramaphosa in terms of negotiations, you know. And so it's not a question of simply having the wisdom of experience, but to use it in a way that's useful to the management and business of building trust when it comes to dealing with coalition politics.
Okay, second last issue I want to explore, and I know it's a biggie, but let's see if we can make in a minute or two a bit of progress before we close this conversation. I want to know where you stand on the question of race. I put the question to Musi. He says he believes in non-racialism. When I asked him what he meant by that, he said, I want people to recognize me first and foremost as a black man, but we need to eliminate oppression on the basis of race. I remain unconvinced, but that's not for me to decide. It's for readers and delegates and voters to decide whether that's a coherent articulation of non-racialism. Where do you stand? And there's a question from Tessa on my Facebook wall where she self-identifies as colored, and she wants to know, do you even self-identify racially?
Well, let me tell you, race was the marker of disadvantage and oppression and exclusion in the past over a very long period of time, and that has had consequences. On black economic empowerment, I think I've actually been the wrong one initially, because what we did was take the scorecard that was put together by DTI and we modified it. And that was a wrong approach to it, because what that has resulted in is simply crony capitalism. It's meant that the people who are already wealthy, black people who are already wealthy, just got more. So we need a different approach to that. So if I was leader of the DA, I would review that entire policy. And this is what I want to do. Say, we need to support black empowerment, and the way to do it, I believe, is to extend the business support networks that we have in this country to wherever it is needed, into the townships, so that there's a one-stop shop when it comes to dealing with paperwork, so that black entrepreneurs have access to capital, venture capital, which can often be small in terms of what their needs are, and that you remove the obstacles to them becoming part of the mainstream economy. Now, the details around that needs to be sorted out, but I think that's where I stand on race. Do I self-identify racially? Not really. I mean, I don't really think of myself as a colored person, but I do.
Are you a black man?
I am a black man, yeah. And,
so that statement doesn't make you go, Inequality is probably, amongst all of our ills, Wilmot, I don't know if you'd agree, one of the worst. It correlates more reliably with gratuitous violence, for example, than even poverty does. So we really need to deal with it. When I put that question to Musi, he went on quite a bit about economic growth. So I want to ask you pointedly, how do we deal with inequality? And do you accept, as per the Mbeki years, that one can have economic growth, but not necessarily have a more equitable distribution of the proceeds of the increase in the national income?
I mean, you can have economic growth and increase inequality. You can eliminate poverty and increase inequality. Right? So what's the priority here? And it's not the same strategy for dealing with this. In my view, the most important thing to do is to eliminate poverty. I think that people are extremely wealthy need to pour much more back into the economy, and I think those bonuses that are paid to very wealthy people should be curtailed not through regulation, but through increased shareholder activism and internal measures within corporations and so on. So this kind of flamboyance that we see in our country, which is quite distasteful, should end. But the key thing to tackle first is poverty alleviation and poverty elimination. It can be done, and you can, and that's not simply economic growth. Economic growth is a necessary, we need to have it, but it's not a sufficient condition for eliminating poverty. So my direct answer to you is, let's lick poverty first, and let's tackle inequality at the top end in terms of how the rich deal with their money and whether they reinvest and so on. But the primary, it's unacceptable in the country, 20 years into democracy, with our kind of wealth and assets, that especially black people live in such misery. It's utterly unacceptable. And I think that's the first target, is to deal with poverty.
Just a final follow-up on that, because you've really excited me with the fantastic answer. Very few politicians own up as you just have, which I think is fantastic, that although these concepts are related, poverty, unemployment and inequality, that they are related but they're also distinct. I get you that we need to prioritize poverty. I think that's probably right. But given that one can do that and still have an unequal society, just out of interest, for about 30 seconds or so, talk me through what you would put on the table by way of intuitions for dealing with inequality if we start seeing that we're making progress on poverty.
Okay, the biggest driver of inequality today is the divergence between wealthy black people and poor black people. That's the biggest driver. So, and that's a consequence of crony capitalism, which is to say that the tenders and some of the preferential access to the goodies that are being handed around is ending up creating a class of very wealthy black people. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's what's driving the inequality. And so what we need to do is make sure that the goodies through tenders should be spread more evenly, that the BE process should be spread more evenly, that it should benefit the small entrepreneur and some rural backwater of the Cape, so that they can make some money.
Wilmot, it's been great chatting to you. All the best for this forthcoming weekend. May the best leader be elected.
Thank you very much, Eusebius. Nice to talk to you.
That was the very first edition of In Conversation with Eusebius McKaiser. Fascinating. I'm not a voting delegate. I'm on record as having said I won't vote for the party even, unless Ellen Zille is no longer the leader. So maybe I am on the brink, who knows? I wonder how you feel. Thank you for tuning in and watching In Conversation with Eusebius McKaiser.